Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and welcome to the show.
The year that you were born, Mum, was the year that everybody was going crazy for the Charleston.
Well, I wouldn't quite remember it, Linda, because the year was 1925 when I was born, but I did hear stories about it, and I can remember my two elder sisters doing the Charleston as I grew up. But more importantly was the Depression year. I think that came about 5 years later, and once again being told stories as how they marched from the Tyneside down to London, where there was just no work, people were starving. I can remember as a little girl my mother helping some of these children who ran around the streets with nothing on their feet and very hungry. I don't think that we suffered very much. I think both my mother and father were sort of very capable people. My father bought a sausage machine and he used to make sausages and go around selling them. And then my mother was a dressmaker. She did quite a bit of sewing and she also enjoyed cooking. So all in all, I had a very good childhood.
And were the sausages good, Mum?
Pardon?
Were the sausages good?
Can't remember. Too young. Can't remember.
That they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
In the Navy, every Navy man's a right guy. Everyone gives him the bright eye, and the Navy, they do right by. To a sailor, all the world is just his main street. When you're in the Navy, you're in the world's best fleet.
What was it like for you, Mum, when you first joined Donald on the ship, this new experience, this new life?
It was a great excitement. I flew to San Francisco and I had to stay with a relative of Donald's until the ship came into port. Only a couple of days. And when the ship came in, she came in to collect cargo, and so she was well out of the water, so a gangway couldn't go down. So a rope came over and tied my suitcase on, and then I climbed up the rope ladder. I hadn't seen Donald for 18 months, and so it was great excitement. Wanted to know all about home and about you, and our first port of call after there was Honolulu. And I was so excited because at midnight I danced on Waikiki Beach. And Donald said, now buy cards and send them home to your sisters. And this is something I did.
Yeah. So you must have made some good friends when you were on the ship. Oh. And how did the crew treat you?
Oh, the crew were fantastic. Of course, I was always called Mum, and but the cadets were the ones. They used to want me to make them little things without Pop knowing, especially Mustafa, when he used to go up on the watch. 8 till midnight, he'd say, "Mum, can you make me a sandwich?" So up I'd go up on the bridge with sandwiches, unbeknown to Donald. And sometimes he'd see me doing a little bit of ironing. He'd say, "Mum, will you iron my uniform for me?" We made a lot of friends with shoreside people too, because over the years I've lost them and missed, with age. But Mustafa, one of the cadets, a Malay boy, he's now a master. He's well in his 60s, and we keep in touch. And his children have even been over here to stay with me.
I was looking through the photo album, Mum, and I came across the photographs of you and Donald rescuing the men out of the sea near the Micronesian islands. Can you tell us a bit about that, please?
Yes, it happened to be one Sunday morning. We arrived in this port in Micronesia. I can't quite remember the name of the port, but they came on board to tell us that a small light aircraft had disappeared with 2 Americans and 1 Micronesian on. And so some of our crew had already gone ashore, but we left them, and Donald just pulled up the anchor and off he went. He was airlifted by radio, giving him places to go to in the area. He was on the bridge. He never left the bridge until the Monday morning, and he came down, and it was just about midday when he got a message to get back up on the bridge, because the chief officer had seen on the horizon something floating, and there was this small raft. And so of course Donald took over, and we saved this small tiny raft with these 2 American and this 1 Vietnamese, and they said that if we hadn't have rescued them that night, the sharks would have had them. It was so tiny, the little raft, and for 3 men on it. Donald couldn't leave the bridge, so a couple of the sailors went over the side to bring them on, but I'll never forget their skin with the salt water. It's very hard to describe just how they...
And tell me about giving them something to drink.
Oh, they were asking for water, and Donald, we were going to give them water, and Donald called down, no, not yet, you don't give them water.
So how long do you have to wait before they can have water?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
It wasn't too long, but I do remember that night they had a darn good meal.
I think that my stepfather, Donald, and my mum, Kathy, were very modest about the sailors that they rescued. And I know that they rescued sailors and airmen when they were in Vietnam, although they were told by their companies never to pick up people. So here's the account which I've seen for the first time from Donald. We found 3 men this afternoon by the grace of God, and they were safe, but alone. One of the crew saw them first, and we got them on board by our man jumping into the water and holding the life raft by the gangway. It was nothing that we did, it was purely God's will. The survivors perked up considerably by the evening, but we were fast asleep by 1845. These 3 men made the number of people I had picked up at sea to 43 since 1945. There were 2 fishermen off Shanghai, 38 from a dredger off the Gulf, and then there were 3 today. It's amazing, isn't it?
I can remember getting letters from you, Mum, when I was at school and then at teacher training college. And Donald and you were taking cargo to and from Vietnam during the war. And I didn't fully comprehend the dangers that you were going through at that young age. But just tell us briefly about your time in Vietnam.
This was from Singapore down to Saigon and Da Nang, going down the Mekong River. You have sandbags all around the bridge. And when you get to a place called Cap San Shark, you have to wait there for a pilot. You'd see all these ships waiting at anchor. And of an evening, you could be out there for at least 10 days waiting for a pilot. Every evening, a pilot boat would come out with a message, and you think, oh, is it coming to me? I'll be going down. One gets a little bit bored swinging around an anchor. But it was the companies who were going to pay the biggest bond to the crew, the pilots. Going down the Mekong River was pretty dangerous. You'd have the American helicopters going over, and they would come down very low and ask what cargo you were carrying.
And I seem to remember that you befriended some of the American
Yes, we did.
Sailors or soldiers.
Yes, well, yes, we'd stay. We'd anchor along on this berth, which was down by the fisherman's wharf, and there was sort of an army camp there, and we made great friends with the crew at the Americans, and they used to ask if they could come on board on pay nights, and Donald used to say, providing you've got your shirt on, yes, and they used to come on and bring their beer, and I used to dance with them, and then we made special friends with a couple of them who wanted to come up to Singapore with us on their R&R, which we would like to have taken them, but of course, if anything should have happened to our ship, the American government want to know what 2 Americans were doing on our ship. Anyway, they flew to Singapore, and then we entertained them when we got into port. We kept in touch with them for quite some time, because the years rolled by and you sort of, their lives change, and my life has changed.
Actually, just mentioning about ships there, Mum, I'm sure we both remember when Donald took us, returned us from Japan back to Hong Kong illegally on his ship. Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember that very well. He got us a ticket to, we couldn't go up with him to Japan. We had to go on one of the other, I wasn't married to Donald then, and we had to go on one of the other company ships, and we weren't going to be able to fly back, to sail back with them. We were going to fly back, so we had an air ticket to fly back. Well, we arrived in Yokohama, and just as we were approaching, there was Donald's ship sailing out. But not to worry, the agent came on board, a very tall, handsome guy, and he looked at me and he said, I've been looking for a tall, blue-eyed woman. It must be you with the little girl. And he said, Captain has asked me to take care of you. And he took us both, after he cleared the ship, he took us both to the Grand Hotel in Yokohama. And Pop had left flowers and fruit and things for you. And it was just absolutely fantastic. And the next morning he took us to Tokyo, and there we flew to the next port of call, which was, where was it?
Was it Kobe, Mum?
Kobe, that's right, Kobe. And there we met Donald. But we hadn't been on the ship 5 minutes when you said you wanted to go ashore. And you went ashore and you went to this big department store all on your own. You're only a little kid. We were worried out of our lives about you.
Anyway, Mum, you can see why I like travelling and adventure. It's all your fault.
Absolutely.
But didn't we go back to Hong Kong on his ship, and
right.
we had to hide in the loo
yes,
or something?
What happened was the ship that we had sailed down to Yokohama on was also in port, and the captain invited us over for dinner. And I had developed a cold, and Donald had told him that I was going back on the train to Tokyo that night, and then catch the train for Hong Kong. And he suggested to Donald, why don't you take them both back on the ship? As long as you get them through immigration and customs here, they'd be okay. So this is what Donald did. And we sailed with him all the way back to Hong Kong. Well, before we got into Hong Kong, we didn't go into a port, you go to an anchor. And so Donald said, you have to go into my bathroom, both of you. So into the bathroom we go until the ship had been cleared with immigration and custom. And then we caught this little Walla Walla boat and went back home.
I remember it well, Mum. Mum, I think I was probably married when you went back to Hong Kong to start the China Coast Community Home. And I've been reading some of the reports about the residents which you wrote. So just listen to this one. Mr. Cooper, he's so much better since I was able to clear his bowels. Relationships between him and Mrs. Manley are still dreadful. Like the rest of the residents, he too enjoyed his Christmas dinner and afterwards played mahjong, which he thoroughly enjoyed because he was winning. He was upset over his belongings being taken from the garage, but never more has been said about that. Can you enlighten us a little bit about some of the residents of the home?
I think it was the year was 1979, and I actually applied for this job. It was for expats of Hong Kong. It actually started with a man called Captain Boothby, who had fought in the war and had fallen on hard times. He was a bit of a drink alcoholic, but after the war, Hong Kong was home to him, and so he stayed in the Mariners Club. All he had was the British pension, which was very little, nothing more. And he wrote his life story of how he had been torpedoed during the war. And at the bottom of his footnote of his letter was a letter from the Dean of the Cathedral to say there were many men and women in Hong Kong with British passports that have been out there all their lives, and in their old age there's nowhere for them to go. They don't speak Chinese, they only speak English, and they felt that there was a need for a home, but it was trying to raise money.
Well, I know you did a really good job, and you used to take the residents on outings once you'd managed to acquire a bus to Lion Rock, Clearwater Bay and places like that, and you'd dance with them.
Yes.
And I think Lady Cater was quite involved with the home, wasn't she?
Lady Cater and also Lord and Lady Kadori, who were the founder members of it. But as I say, I had no training. I went to a council home here first to see how they ran. I went to a private nursing home to see how they ran. And so out of that, I've sort of got my own knowledge. But yes, I think I was given the worst 7 residents that there could have been. But what I used to do, I used to go and meet them in their homes where they lived and suggest what they should bring in when they came. They used to arrive and their suitcases would be full of cockroaches. And I think the first thing I would want them to do was to have a bath. But I mustn't say that for all of them.
Wasn't that the same for Mrs. Harveston? She was found in a box.
Mrs. Harveston was found in a box by 2 English boys. And she was almost blind. And so she went into the army hospital where they did cataracts. They did not think that she would settle in the China Coast. But she did, and she was one of my best residents. She didn't ever want us to go into her room to clean it. Every day she'd go off down to Kowloon Market, come back with more rubbish. But I loved her. She really was lovely.
And she was obviously happy in the home.
Yes, she was. Yeah. All 7 of them. Really.
But obviously there was a bit of gossiping going on, because I've read, this is headed Gossiping. This is becoming a rather serious problem in the home, and it's causing us much concern. I understand that Mrs. Adlington is the main instigator. In fact, I know that she is. And not only gossips with other residents, but with members of the committee and visitors when they visit the home. It seems that she's far worse on my day off when she knows that I'm not there to overhear. I'd like you to know, in brackets, at least 2 committee members, that she is a gossip and can be very malicious at times.
Yes. She was a Japanese woman, and Mrs. Dillon, who was English, who was told she had to marry a rich man, she'd never make a poor man's wife. She lived in the Mandarin Hotel all her life, and the 2 of them, oh my goodness, and the minibus, they would start a fight. It was dreadful, and I used to stop the minibus just before we get to the house and say, now both get out and walk the rest of the way.
But they say that old people go back, well, we all do, to our childhood, so they're a bit like naughty children then.
Yes.
Yeah?
But there was only Ah Yi, the Chinese girl, to help me. And on Chinese New Year, when she was away, I had to do it all on my own. And I remember this one time, I got them all down at the table to help me do the vegetables. And Mrs. Dillon thought that when she peeled the potatoes and the carrots and put them in the water, just in the saucepan, that they would be cooking there. Didn't know she had to put them on the stove and cook them. Anyway, this one particular day, I took them all down the Mariners Club in the minibus. And they looked so funny, honestly, in their hats and things. And I took them into the bar. And some of the members there, they said they didn't know how I could look after them. They said, you need a medal the way you look after these old people.
Well,
But I loved every minute of
Yeah,
it.
you did a great job, Mum. And let's just finish what you wrote about Mrs. Dillon, who you were very fond of.
Yes.
In February 1981. Mrs. Dillon, she died early in the morning of the 18th of February. I found her sitting in her chair looking very peaceful. There was no panic at the home, and in fact, one of the elderly people said, "Oh, Mrs. Dillon has died, but there's no hot water this morning."
That's correct.
Yeah. Mrs. Dillon became very dear to me, and so I enjoyed all the love and care which we gave to each other. May she rest in peace. Thank you very much, Mum.
I'm going well, I'm going Shell.
Good heavens, I know that voice.
I'm going well on Shell, Shell, Shell.
It's Bing Crosby.
Britain is great, well, let's see it in state. You can be sure of Shell. In the Emerald Isle, you drive with a smile. Nothing but fun on Shell, Shell, Shell. Ah, you can be sure of Shell. On the old heather track, well, hi, Mac, I'm doing well on Shell, Shell, Shell. I'm going well on Shell. Now it's the end of the trip, and it's back to the ship. What a wonderful time on Shell, Shell, Shell. That's another road film over. Oh, you can be sure of Shell.
Thanks, Bing.
It's a pleasure, Mr. Shell. Keep going well, keep going Shell. You can be sure of Shell.